first grade 9 academic math lesson. This is a review lesson, things that hopefully all look familiar to you. And by the time you work through some assignment questions, you'll well remember how to work with fractions and integers. Language-wise, what is an integer? When I say integer, I mean a whole number that is no decimals, and it can be positive, negative, and include 0. And you might remember using a number line to add and subtract integers, and I put the number line just to remind you. You can use a number line with me if you want to. With time, I want you to be able to do all the adding and subtracting integers in your head. By the time you get to grade 10, grade 11, integers become very, very important. Okay, just a quick reminder on adding integers. Something you want to remember, that if you have two signs, like a plus and a minus sign, and for good communication you'd have the minus inside a bracket, but with two different signs and you're adding or subtracting, means two different signs means a subtract. Okay, so if it's plus a minus or minus a plus, either way, they're both just 3 minus 4, which is negative 1. If I was giving the answer. So the general rule then, adding a negative or subtracting a positive is always just subtracting. Okay, and that kind of is a natural, or that might be normal for you to remember. As I jump to the next screen, I remind you that when you watch the lessons on your own, you're always welcome to pause if I start going too fast. And you can re-listen to something too if I go too fast. In this particular case, you might already have it written down. If you have two of the same side, like subtracting a negative or adding a positive, excuse me, it's the same as just adding, right? So 3 minus 4 is 3 plus 4, which is 7. Okay, just a little thing that again I think is very, remember for sure. If you see a positive sign, or maybe more importantly, if you don't see a positive sign, that means it's still positive, unless it says a negative explicitly in front of it. Like just 3 is positive 3, right? Those things are all the same equivalent statements. 2 in brackets equals 2 equals plus 2. All right, so this looks like a lot of writing, but it's to me the best way to, or not the best, it's a way you can remember adding and subtracting integers. If you think about a soccer team, if you have, imagine you got a soccer team and you add a good player to your team. That's like adding a positive. So if you're adding a positive, your team then becomes better. It becomes more positive. Okay, so my example of that is, imagine 3 is your existing team. You add a good player, you add a positive, you end up with a more positive. And when I say more positive, it's more positive than 3 because it's a bigger number. Example B, or situation B, if you lose a good player, it'd be like subtracting a positive. So, and the team would get worse, they become more negative. And similarly, on my example then, you have your team, say it's a 3, you subtract a really good player, you subtract a 5, your team becomes more negative. Okay? Smaller than 3. Adding a bad player is like adding a negative. And if you add a negative, add a bad player to your team becomes worse, or could become worse. So if it's becoming worse, that means that it's becoming more negative, right? So you say your team, you add a bad player, you're more negative than you started, because negative 2 is more negative than 3. Losing a bad player is like subtracting a negative. The team gets better. So you got a team, and your worst player, goes on the injured reserve list. Perfect, because then you can always play your better players. So subtracting a negative player makes you more positive. Anyways, if that helps you remember, that's great. If not, that's okay too. All right, on to fractions. A little terminology. The number on the top of a fraction is called the numerator. The number on the bottom is called the denominator. If you have a fraction that has a bigger number on top, it's an improper fraction. If it has a smaller number on top, it's a proper fraction. And then there's mixed fractions. And a mixed fraction is when there's a whole number in the front. And we don't like them in high school math, and what you're almost always going to do if you see one is you're going to turn it into an improper fraction. Almost as soon as you see a mixed fraction, just put it right into an improper fraction. We deal with improper fractions all the time. We don't deal with mixed fractions. Woodworking class, what mixed fractions are important to understand and what they are, there's no question, because there's lots of applications. But as you get into more advanced algebra, like you're going to do in high school academic math, we deal with improper fractions. Just remembering what this actually means, it's 1 plus 3/4, right? And that's really the same as 1.75. So 1 3/4 is the same as 1.75. When you see a fraction, I want you to always remember divide. That's all it is. It's a divide. But instead of expressing it as 3/4, instead of just expressing it as a decimal, which is, if you put that in your calculator, 3 divided by 4, we're putting it this way. It's just another way to express something, a number. It's just one number, really, without dividing it. Sorry, I got a bit of a cough. Okay, so a little skill, like I said, if you see a mixed fraction, you got to get rid of it right away. And the strategy for doing that, I think you're going to remember this. I have it all written here. And what I say is, the first step is multiply the denominator by the whole number. So 4 times 1, 4 times 1. And that gives us this number here, right? Whatever you get for your answer here, you add to the numerator to get 7. And there's your answer. The other way that I would think of that, remember I said that's really 1 plus 3/4. Well, it'd be kind of the same as doing 4/4 plus 3/4 to get 7/4. That's why it is 7/4. Okay? Next skill, adding and subtracting fractions. I have 3 examples of add. Subtracting is really the same. It just means you're subtracting instead of adding. The strategy is the same, and you'll notice that I crossed out the first few steps in this particular example. And the reason that I did is that it's not a mixed fraction, and there is a common denominator. We didn't need to do those two. So we jump right to step 3, right? You add the numerator only. So we have the same denominator. There's our common denominator of 3. You don't add the denominator. You only add the number on top. And you get 6/3, and lowest terms would be 6 divided by 3, which is 2, or 2/1, which 2 makes more sense to say. Just a quick thought, why we use just the one denominator, why you don't add the denominator. If you thought of it this way, if you had 1/3 plus 1/3, that's not really 2/6, because 2/6 is just 1/3 in lowest terms, right? It's 1/3 plus 1/3 is 2/3. And if you think of, you had a third of a pizza and another third of a pizza, and you put them together, you'd end up with 2/3 of a pizza. You wouldn't end up with 1/3 of a pizza. So don't forget. My point is just when you're adding or subtracting fractions, you don't add the denominator. You find the lowest common denominator and you keep it. All right, just a little more complicated example. Again, I scratched out, it's not mixed, so I scratched out that one. But we did find, the first thing I did here was find my common denominator. And the easiest choice for a common denominator, the easiest thing to do for a common denominator is to multiply the two denominators that you have. It doesn't mean it's the lowest common denominator, but it's a common denominator, and that's fine. That's all you need. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't think too hard about it. I would just say common denominator 15. And that means that this term, top and bottom, you have to multiply by 3. The reason you're multiplying by 3 is, well, I want 15 down here, but if I want to multiply the bottom by, like this 5 by 3 to get 15, I would change the number if I didn't multiply the top as well, right? That would be 2/15, and that doesn't make sense. That's not the same as 2/5. So 3/3 is just like multiplying by 1, because 3 divided by 3 is 1. So anyway, so you do that on both sides here, and here I had to multiply the top and bottom by 5, right? Because 3 times 5 is 15, and you end up with this here. From there, my common denominator is 15, and what you do is you notice I have this negative here. And it's kind of confusing. What should I do with this negative? And you can do, you can put it here with a 15. You could keep it here. You can put it up here. From a practical point of view, when you're adding or subtracting fractions, you put it with the numerator. Okay? So you bring it up to the numerator, and then you just negative 6 plus 20 is 14, and you end up with 14/15. That's lowest terms. Last example like that. This time I do have a mixed fraction, so the first thing we have to do is kill the mixed fraction. And I do that by going 2 times 3, which is 6, plus 1 is 7. So it's 7/2. So that's step 1, get rid of the mixed fraction. Step 2, common denominator. In this case, 5 times 2 is 10. So I'm going to get 10 on the bottom of each, which means multiplying this one by 2/2, by 1, which is 2/2, and this one by 5/5, which is 1, to get a common denominator of 10. Again, I brought the negative up to the top, right there. That looks like this. which gives you 31 over 10, again, lowest terms. Okay, moving on to multiplying. First thing again, make a mixed fraction an improper fraction. Excuse me, multiply the top, and this time you do multiply the bottom as well. So when you're multiplying, you do top and bottom. So 6 times 2 over 7 times 5. Okay? If you can put it in lowest terms, but there's no lowest terms here. You might think about it, but there's not one. Okay, so here's our mixed fraction. So we're going to have to kill that mixed fraction. So 3 times 5 is 15, plus 2 is 17. Excuse me. Now I have a 6 and 17 and 7 and 5. Multiply the top, multiply the bottom. Again, I thought long and hard about it, and I don't think that there is a common a lowest terms. I think that's it. All right. So the very next thing you see on your note should be a little thing that says, questions I still have about this note. So when you watch your lessons at home, please make a note there if you think I went through something. I skimmed over something you didn't get, I went too fast, something that didn't work for you, please make a note of it so I can answer it for you in class. And that's the end of our first recorded lesson.